Hello, and welcome to Of the People. I am Robert Chernin with my lovely co-host, Ericka Redic. Say hello.
Hello, Ericka.
And she looks even better than she sounds. So,
Well,
folks,
you got to come check us out on Rumble. Check out how good we look. I'm good looking, but Robert, today you look marvelous, darling. You look absolutely marvelous.
before we get too far astray, folks, you want to stay with us for today's show. Second segment, we have Mark Meckler with us,
That's
President of
right.
Convention of States. This is important stuff, right? With all the dysfunction in Washington, there's a movement, some of you may know, I suspect some of you don't know, called Convention of States, Article 5 of the Constitution, to call a convention to try to limit the powers of the federal government. Mark's president. He was one of the founders of the Tea Party Patriots. Really, really great, great movement. Stay with us for the second segment to learn about
Yes.
Convention of States. What say you,
Yes.
Eric?
I say just for full disclosure, I am a petition signer of the petition to encourage the Vermont State Legislature to pass the resolution for a convention of states. So I am a fangirl. You know me. I'm all about full disclosure. I've been a volunteer for Convention of States for years. I am currently the state videographer for Vermont. I was the legislative liaison years ago.
Wait a minute. I have to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Um, I would wager you that you
Mm.
and I will be dead and buried before Vermont ever signs on to a convention of states. You want to talk about a Pyrrhic gesture? Do you really think those flaming communists in Vermont are in the legislature? I mean, this is the state that has given us Bernie Sanders, right? The gift that keeps on giving,
Oh
right?
my God.
So,
It's so
so I
embarrassing.
look. I applaud your enthusiasm. I applaud your patriotism. I'm
Yes.
not so sure I applaud your naivety about thinking Vermont would ever sign
Hey,
on
that's
to
fair.
this.
That is,
Okay.
I will take that. I will take that. I will admit that I am a bit of an ideologue at times for
Oh
sure.
my word!
But I got to tell you, Robert, 4,000 new petition signers in Vermont in the last
Well,
six
let's
months,
see.
I think.
What's the state population? 600,000,
It's like
650.
16 people. So
Yeah.
basically,
Okay.
that's everybody has signed
And
the petition.
this is your these are all the Republicans in Vermont, folks, who's all her extended family, and she made them an
Literally.
offer. She made them an offer they couldn't refuse. You're going to sign this paper.
Or I'm
Um,
going to come over
but
there and no, I'm
exactly.
kidding.
So before we get to Mark in the next segment, so serious little update on Go Woke, Go Broke, which I want to
Oh,
jump in on, right? Because
ooh,
we've been hammering that, and folks, you're voting with your dollars.
I love it.
Keep voting. But
Love to see it.
by the way, Target is now in the tank for $17 billion. Anheuser-Busch, they're even saying may go into bear territory, $15 billion. So you know what the word that comes to mind in all of this is for me? Consequences. Because
Ooh,
think about it. When you look at any segment of society, the problem with rampant crime is you can commit crime, there's no consequences,
that's right.
right? You can defund the police, there's no
No
consequences. You
consequences.
can open your border and have people basically invade your country, no consequences,
That's
right?
right.
And now you can, obviously you can, well, up until now, you could put out whatever cultural woke crap you wanted in retail, and there were no consequences until now. Disney's feeling it, but 17 billion market cap, 15 billion market cap. You know what's coming next? What do you bet there's going to be a shareholder lawsuit from a couple of these corporations,
Ooh, well,
which we haven't seen yet?
I'm really curious. That's a good question because one of the things when we're talking about the go woke, go broke stuff
Right.
is um are the ESG scores, right? So we know that
Tell them
these
everybody what ESG is. Come on, what's ESG?
oh my god,
Remember,
environmental social governance,
governance. Okay, all
right?
right. You got it. I just
So
wanted to put you on the spot.
thank you. Good. That was good. So basically, the Black Rocks and the organizations like this make funding and things like that based on your ESG score. Exactly how woke are you? And so now that there is, and part of that push was what was called stakeholder capitalism. Do you remember that term?
Never
Do you
even
remember
heard
when
that term.
So, okay, so
what is stakeholder capitalism?
So instead of shareholder capitalism, right, which is when you're the owner, right, you're an owner of the business, or you're a shareholder, you actually own shares of the business. They started pushing this idea of stakeholder capitalism, whereas basically anybody in the community around the business, anybody who shops at the business, everybody everywhere is now a stakeholder and therefore should have a say in how the business is run. And so that was part of, was that like 6, 7, 8 years ago? They really started talking about this.
Obama. That sounds like Obama.
It absolutely is. And then when the third the third oh my God, I'm gonna say it wrong. Basically, when Biden got elected.
The third term of Obama.
The third term of Obama, that's what you call it.
See, this is why you need me.
You need
me to help. See, I need to be needed, and this is why you need me to help you with this stuff.
I'm pretty, okay? You're the brains. I'm the looks.
Not so much. Well, you are the looks. I don't know if I'm the brains, but okay. I got it.
No, but so this idea of stakeholder capitalism came into being really during Obama, and then they started pushing it again during the Biden administration, all this ESG stuff. It's the foundation of all of this ESG stuff. So now we're seeing the consequence of you saying that everyone has a say in how my business is going to be run.
Which is
I'm going to let the woke mob decide what products I'm going to sell.
Hey, go woke, go broke. I have no sympathy. Look, I don't even agree with the bank bailouts. I understand about the domino theory with banks and the financial solvency of the country. But at the end of the day, we have removed consequences. There's now starting to be some consequences, except, of course, if you're in New York City and you commit a crime or do drugs, which, by the way, so you remember we were talking in New York City that they had this whole social service kiosk that if you were going to commit a crime, you were going to log into the kiosk and you were going to get social service help that's going to prevent you from doing a crime.
Yeah.
All right. You ready for this? When you just thought it couldn't get any more stupid, New York City has put out vending machines for drug users, right? Where you can get everything but syringes, right? You can get Narcan, you can get a sniff kit, you can get a smoke kit. By the way, the smoke kit, if you want to smoke crack cocaine, they give you a free smoke kit, and they even give you lip balm in case your lips get chapped.
Oh my God, Robert, this is
look it up. Ericka, would I ever lie to you? Would I ever lie to you?
I can't. I'm gonna start rocking to soothe myself right now. Oh my God, what? Vending machines? Is it like free?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's the best part. It's free, right? The only thing you have to enter. No. The only thing you have to enter is your zip code. Look at it, folks. Look it up. And I hate to do this to everybody, but we're going to have to be really short in the first segment because we want to give our guest all the time he deserves, and he does deserve a lot of time.
Oh my God! So we only got one outrage moment.
And I had so many of them lined up.
Oh my God!
Okay, it's just. But folks, we're going to come back to this concept of no consequences because it is the one thing that ties everything together. When you look at all the problem areas, it's all because we removed consequences.
That's right.
But like if you piss off Ericka, there are consequences, right? I know that. So that's why I'm always so nice to her. Right. But Ericka, we're going to come back to the vending machine. But hey, folks, the nice thing about New York City is if you want to know where not to go, just look for the vending machines and don't go there. Because they're putting them in the worst areas.
I love it.
I love it. Stuff up. Folks, you are listening to Of the People. I'm Robert Chernin.
I'm Ericka Redic.
And stay tuned for Mark Meckler, Convention of States. We will be right back. Hi, I'm Robert Chernin.
And I'm Ericka Redic.
And we are Of the People. You can find us on Rumble. You can find me on Twitter at RBChernin.
And I am at Ericka Redic.
Look us up. You'll be entertained.
That we guarantee.
Absolutely. She's never wrong.
Ever. Just ask my husband.
The last thing we can control is what we do. What we do. And I can tell you what we do as Americans, and I can tell you what we do as Texans, is that we stand up. And no matter how many times we get knocked down, we stand up again. And no matter how many times we get knocked down, we come back to the fight. I can promise you this for me, personally. I can say this for everybody who got up on this stage today, and I think I can say it for all of you. There is a time that will come when I will quit fighting. And that time is when that first shovel of dirt hits the top of my damn pine box. And until then, I will fight. God bless you. God bless the state of Texas. And God bless the United States of America.
Hello, and welcome back to Of the People. I'm Robert Chernin with my lovely co-host,
Ericka Redic,
who's here. And we are thrilled, truly, to have with us Mark Meckler, president of Convention of States, one of the founders of the Tea Party Patriots, also an attorney, guys. Don't hold that part against him. But Mark, thank you for joining us on Of the People.
Hey, really glad to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You know, we cover a lot of topics, but these are serious times. And I know the whole movement for Convention of States, you know, to effect change to the Constitution, because if they won't do it in Congress, the only alternative, obviously, is to try to call a Convention of States. And you have made a lot of progress since, is it 2012, 2013?
August of 2013. It'll be 10 years this August 13th.
Okay. And if you don't mind, can you just, for the listeners who may not know what Convention of States is, obviously it's tied to Article 5 of the Constitution, give a quick background as to what Convention of States is trying to do, why it's important?
Sure. So Article 5 of the United States Constitution contains the ways that we can amend our Constitution. There are two ways. The first clause of Article 5 says that when 2/3 of both houses of Congress want to propose an amendment, they can do so. And then that goes out for ratification by 3/4 of the states. In convention in 1787, George Mason pointed out a flaw. He said, if we only give that power to Congress, then they're never going to propose amendments limiting their own power or tyranny. So he proposed we had a second clause, which they did unanimously without debate, that says when 2/3 of states desire to call a convention, they can pass applications or resolutions through their state legislatures. And when 2/3, or today 34 states, agree, then the states can gather in convention to propose amendments. And then it goes back through the same ratification process. 38 states, 3/4 of states, have to ratify. So today, Convention of States, our organization where I'm president, exists to promote a convention based around 3 subject matter areas, talking about, number one, term limits for Congress and for other members of the federal government, staffers, bureaucrats, the people we know as the deep state, judiciary. Number two, proposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, anything like a balanced budget amendment, tax caps or spending caps. And number three, scope and jurisdiction restrictions on the federal government, which would be broadly described as power restrictions on the federal government.
I really like that idea of term limits not being restricted to elected officials, but also every member of the federal government. I think some of us might have liked that for a certain doctor who was in charge of things the last few years.
Yeah, we call that the Fauci Amendment these days.
Oh, is that part of the Convention of States platform?
Yeah, you can limit bureaucrats, and I think this is really important. First of all, I think largely the administrative state is a constitutional abomination. It shouldn't exist. I don't think that the Congress has the power to delegate lawmaking responsibility, and they've done that. But in lieu of that, we have to limit their power, but we should also limit their terms. They were never intended to be unaccountable bureaucrats, unelectable, completely unaccountable to the people serving for 40 years. That's part of the problem, part of the disease in Washington, D.C. And yeah, you could, for example, impose a limitation and say nobody can collect a paycheck from the federal government in the bureaucracy longer than 12 years or 15 years, pick your term.
And Mark, if I may, I'd like to add to that a suggestion that public unions, private unions are one thing. I mean, public employee unions, right? I think that's part of the problem. That's part of the entrenched bureaucracy that you're fighting against. But
Yeah,
I have a
not only
question.
do I agree with that, Robert, but look, the great conservative, I put that in air quotes, being ironic here. FDR said that public unions, unionization of public employees, was fundamentally incompatible with public service. It's outrageous that we
Exactly.
even have public employee unions, and the only reason that we have them is they are chartered by the federal government, and we could absolutely in this convention make those charters unconstitutional.
No, do me a favor, just add that to the list, because I think without that, because it's not just the bureaucrats, the administrative state are the employee, the rank and file that, regardless of administration, stay there and they do what they generally want to do anyways. But you touched on something before I really dive into the whole Convention of States concept with you, and how far along you are and where you need to get to, is really, the other issue really goes back to the Constitution about Congress's responsibility to pass clear laws. We've talked in prior episodes of the show. Neil Gorsuch, the Supreme Court Justice, wrote about where part of the problem is that Congress has delegated their responsibility through lack of clear laws to basically the executive branch or the administrative branch to implement. Right. So, is there anything in the Convention of States geared towards Congress, or is it just a constitutional Congress to rewrite or limit congressional powers that way?
It would be anything that would limit the freedom of Congress or the president or the courts or the administrative agencies to do whatever they want. This is what would be known, broadly speaking, as a limiting powers convention. So, for example, and I do agree with you, I think we need to specifically limit the congressional power, which is largely now granted and authorized by the courts. It's not in the Constitution, to delegate lawmaking authority to agencies. So one thing that most people don't realize is when Congress passes a law and says, for example, they want to regulate the waters of the U.S., generally speaking, the statute itself is not comprehensive. There's always what's called an enabling clause in there, and it says something like the secretary of whatever department they're empowering, shall make such laws as further the desires of this act that we're passing. And so what that means is then you have the secretary of a particular cabinet department deciding what the rules and regulations should be. That secretary is unaccountable to the American people. In a lot of cases now, they're passing laws, they're serving as judge and jury, and then they decide on punishments. In my opinion, this is completely unconstitutional, and you could absolutely stop that process with a convention.
Got it. So one last point before we really dive in, and Eric, I know there's a couple things you want to bring up as well. So I know that in the next Supreme Court session, they're going to take on what we call the Chevron decision.
Yeah.
Right? And the Chevron decision, for those listening, is where the courts, it's an egregious, frankly, ruling in my opinion, but the courts basically have left it up through the Chevron decision, to the administrative agencies, i.e. in the executive branch, to interpret and essentially what I would say is make law. So we'll see if what the Supreme Court does with that Chevron ruling, and that may, Mark, speak to exactly what I think what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'd love to jump in there for a second. I have to explain this a lot to folks. The Chevron doctrine actually said that and I'm going to give an extreme example, that if an agency passed a regulation that said that the sky is blue, and then later on they just made a decision saying, well, what that really means is that the sky is green, then you are bound by their interpretation. It's not required to be reasonable. It's great deference. It's called the Chevron deference doctrine. So it says that an agency has the right to interpret their own regulations, and it doesn't even have a requirement of reasonableness. Over the last couple of sessions, the Supreme Court has pared back Chevron deference, and there is a possibility that they're going to overturn this. What that does is it opens up a lane of litigation for private litigants, big companies, individuals, to challenge the regulatory scheme imposed on them and the interpretations imposed on them by the agencies. So I think this is an excellent pruning back of the administrative state.
I think if you could, Mark, just for a second, because so as much as we love to pick on lawyers, this is the benefit of your legal background. You explain reasonableness, okay? Because I don't think a lot of Americans understand that using the word reasonable, reasonable person, things like that, when it comes to interpreting law or passing down judgment. Can you explain a little bit about why that word is so important and what it means?
Yeah, and there's a long history of what's called the reasonable man standard. And this goes back to common law in England. We brought this over to the colonies with us. It's the idea of just what would just a normal average person think this means. So, in other words, I gave a ridiculous example that the agency says the sky is blue, and then later on they say the sky is green. And so, if you, as a reasonable person, were to read the language, it says the sky is blue, then you would say, okay, well, they're trying to regulate the sky being blue. And when they come back and say the sky is green, well, no reasonable person would believe that. And what the courts had done with Chevron deference is said, well, it doesn't really matter what an average normal person would think. We're going to defer to the agency because the agency is the expert here. And what it really did effectively is it made it possible for these agencies to essentially do anything they wanted under any regulation, because the deference, the benefit of the doubt was provided to the agency, not to the reasonable person. The reasonable person standard is a very important standard in British common law, in American law, and in a lot of cases, we've abrogated that standard. We need to go back to that standard a lot more.
I would absolutely agree with that. That is just, sometimes I hear these court decisions, or I hear about these choices being made by the administrative state, what you might call the deep state, the administrative state, the unelected fourth branch of government, and you just go, how did we get here? This is absolutely outrageous. And I think that's why a convention of states is so attractive to the American people right now, and why I know you're seeing a lot of energy. I know Vermont has seen a huge increase in petition signers recently, the more they are unreasonable and kind of going off of the cliff.
Yeah, look, I think one of the reasons we see the increase in enthusiasm generally is, regardless of what party you belong to, what your sort of political ideology is, very few people believe that DC is running well. Very few people believe that DC isn't off the rails. And so you have this broad consensus in the American body politic that DC is out of control. It doesn't relate to the American people anymore. We can't relate to them, and that we need to take power away from them and give it back to the people. It's not a partisan issue. There's no actual policy contained in the idea of calling this convention of states. The prime idea in a convention of states, the one that we're proposing, is that there should be a debate in the United States of America about where the power resides, who makes the decisions. So we ask the question, who decides? The average American, left, right, and center, all say, I should decide about my own life, or if it has to be decided at a government level, maybe it's local, maybe it's state, but very few people would say, well, we love when the federal government decides for everybody.
You make a good point. Obviously, quoting Ronald Reagan, the larger the size of the federal government, the less freedoms we have. And I think that's on steroids at this point. But I want to get back to the actual mechanics of this, if we can, for a second, Mark. So the fifth clause, the Article 5 of the Constitution is what, 140 words?
Yeah, it's the shortest clause.
Shortest clause. And if you take out the last two pieces, last two parts, one about direct taxes and the other about slave trade, right? I think you're down to 90 words, right? So it's a very small, there's a lot of ambiguity as to how this would function. So mechanically, how would this process go forward? Because obviously, look, there's only two ways to amend the Constitution. One would be if it was proposed in the Senate, well, both houses, bicameral, would have to propose it. But I think it's 2/3 and then 3/4 of the states would have to pass it.
Correct.
Or you can do what I call an end around, which is what I think this convention of states is, because Congress is not going to abrogate its own power base or its own power.
Okay.
So how would this work in terms of logistics, a real convention of states? Because I know you did a mock convention of states in Williamsburg a couple of years ago, I think, or years ago. But how would it work?
Yeah, I mean, so for folks who want to see that, they can go to our website and they can look up the simulation. They can see at least 6 hours of video from it. And then we're going to be doing another one here at the beginning of August back in Williamsburg. Again, we're going to repeat that and bring in delegates from all over the country. Basically, the way it works, though, is once you get to 34 states that have aggregated their applications, aggregated is a legal term, meaning all the applications are the same. In our case, those three subject matter areas I described. Once you get to 34 states, then it says Congress has a role, and the role is limited to something us lawyers call ministerial or secretarial. It means it's non-discretionary. They have to call the convention. They have to call it on those terms, and they have to name the time and place. I believe because it's D.C., they're going to name the place as Washington, D.C. The convention itself, once it convenes, will have the ability to reconvene anywhere they want. From talking to state leaders and legislators all over the country, they'll probably reconvene somewhere like Kansas City or Dallas or Oklahoma City, somewhere in the middle of the country. And then once they convene, they're going to discuss these three subject matter areas. Now, one of the questions that comes up is who goes to convention? Well, one of the things I love about this is it's purely federalist. Every state will decide. Their state legislature will be in charge of choosing delegates and how the delegates get chosen. It could be everything from a public election to a certain number from each house. A lot of the states are now passing what they call delegate selection acts. These are actually pieces of legislation that determine how delegates get selected, generally, again, still within the control of the legislature. When they get to convention, when they send their delegation, they can send as many people as they like, but each state gets one vote. So whether it's California or Rhode Island, the states are going to have the same vote.
So my question is how, because obviously, look, 90 words, right? And I think we're bringing in the 10th Amendment to the Bill of Rights. Is when I think I'm hearing, right? If the power is not specifically enumerated to be the federal government's by omission, a la the 10th Amendment to the Bill of Rights, it then resides with the state. So am I right on that so far?
Yeah, I think you're right on that, but I think also that the Article 5 is very clear in its direct delegation of power to the states and not Congress. And also, if you look at the history, if we're going to be originalists, which I assume all three of us are, what we look at is we look at convention and what did they intend when they did this? And they said very clearly to us that they intended for the federal government not to be involved. Colonel George Mason stood and he said, "Are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny?" And then he proposes, as you called, an end around not only Congress, the president, the courts, everything. He wants the states, when he proposes this, to be able to stand up in the alternative and say, "Hey, you guys are out of control and we retain the power to fix it."
So I guess my question, and I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, is the concern of a runaway convention.
Yep.
Right? Because obviously for those people who don't know their history, and that's our American history, which is most people, unfortunately,
A lot
today.
of people, let's be real.
Right. A lot of people. That's one of the things Eric and I are talking about, is doing a man on the street segment where we take the camera and ask people what they actually know about either the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. But we're still trying to find a bodyguard to come with us because we don't think the response is going to be really good. But
especially in Austin.
I'm happy to go with y'all.
Well, we just want the guys. We want a couple of the IRS guys that are carrying guns to come with us just to protect us.
Hey, this is Texas, Robert. We're all carrying guns.
Full disclosure, I live in the live free or die state of New Hampshire. We want all those guys in the city to come up here and try all that stuff up here. We'll give you a nice welcome.
A warm upstate welcome
for you.
Yeah, they won't. Well, first of all, they're not going to come in the middle of winter because they're pansies. They can't handle the cold. But serious question. Obviously, the three of us all know Declaration of Independence, 1776. Then we had the Articles of Confederation for 11 years, and that the Constitutional Congress that was called in 1787 to reform the Articles of Confederation essentially exceeded their mandate, and they said, "Hey, this isn't working. We're going to throw it out and write a constitution." And that's been 230 years. So can you speak to that a little bit? Because there is some concern. I mean, obviously, I've, like you've been in politics a long time. A lot of
first of all,
support it.
First of all, I'm going to push back, and you're going to find this fascinating as a guy who loves history, that 1787 was absolutely, unequivocally, undeniably not a runaway convention. They did not exceed their authority. If you read the actual commissions of the commissioners that attended convention, All but two of them contain a phrase somewhat similar to this, almost identical. It says, the commissioner has any and all authority to propose anything necessary to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the union. There's no limitation on their power. Madison says, when talking about the convention, if you want to know the authority of the commissioners at convention, read their commissions. There's a definitive law review article written on this. It's roughly 100 pages, written by Michael Ferris, fully footnoted. He's been through all the histories, all the commissions. I have the entire history of the ratification of the United States Constitution sitting on my library shelf back there. I've read all the ratification debates. There's no objection to the process used. Nobody's talking about a runaway convention in 1787 or 1789 by the time of ratification. This is something, Robert, that was invented later and primarily invented by the radical left in America to prevent folks like us from using the Constitution to save the Constitution. So I can provide you with all those citations. You don't have to believe me. All that stuff is on our website. 1787 was not a runaway convention. And I would say this, and this is really important. We need to remember who those men in convention were. And I think all of us would say that we broadly revere them as some of the wisest people in the country's history. More importantly, some of the most honorable. Not all of them, they're human beings, they're sinners, they're flawed, but some of the most honorable. At that time in American history, if somebody said something that was a challenge to your honor, then in most states, you had the absolute right to challenge them to a duel. I mean, we all know the Hamilton-Burr duel was over matters of honor.
Sure.
You could kill somebody for accusing you of not living up to your duty. Now, imagine George Washington presiding as president of the convention. Imagine Madison and Adams and all these men sitting in convention, and they all just say, you know what? We know we have limitations, but we're just going to blow all that stuff off. It's a slander on the founders and the framers. I'll spend the rest of my life defending them from that slander.
Wow. Mark, why do you think? Okay, we know that the radical left wants to destroy everything that we have, right? Let me not be hyperbolic, okay? They want to destroy our foundations. They don't
Right.
like our rights, our liberties, our duties or responsibilities. So why do you think there is this push? If they want to destroy the Constitution and institutions and foundations anyway, why do you think there's this opposition from leftist groups like Soros or, other sort of opponents?
Well, so I'm going to back up and I'm going to merge. So I answered half of Robert's question, and then I'm going to merge the
sorry.
answers to these two questions if I could.
Yeah.
So the idea of a runaway convention really comes into the mainstream of the American lexicon post Roe versus Wade, 1973. What you start to see is a bunch of states rise up and propose Article 5 applications, pass applications for a convention to overturn Roe versus Wade. And so ultimately they get to 20 states, right where we're at right now. It's a pretty serious movement. And at some point in the early 80s, Chief Justice Warren Burger and Phyllis Schlafly from Eagle Forum have a written exchange. And Schlafly asks Burger, you might recognize that name because he signed Roe versus Wade, what do you think of the idea of a convention that people are pushing? And what do you think he's going to say? That's the seminal decision of his career. He says, we might have a runaway convention and lose our beloved Constitution. Again, this is all public record. This is not Mark just saying this stuff. And immediately, law professors at Harvard and Yale write articles about the runaway convention. This is not something that's been a conservative idea. It's not something that's been an idea at all in the American body politic. It is invented specifically by the radical left to prevent the right from using a convention of states. And there is a through line through American history since the late 1970s, early 1980s of being against a convention of states. And in fact, about 5 years ago on Good Friday, a group led by Common Cause and Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, both George Soros funded groups, got together, and they now have a coalition of over 250 leftist groups that have signed a press release against the idea of a convention of states. And this is the baddies. This is the worst of the worst. It's Planned Parenthood, it's La Raza, it's MoveOn.org, it's Daily Cause, it's the Socialist Party of America. Like every nasty left-wing, America-hating, baby-killing group you could think of has signed on to this press release. And so this is what stuns me when conservatives say, well, conservatives are worried about this. Well, there are some on the edges of the conservative movement that are, but they've been duped by the radical left in America. The radical left is entirely united against this. I can tell you, for example, Russ Feingold back in October wrote a book against this, attacking this, saying exactly what we're doing, trying to limit the administrative state, trying to create a smaller government. He just said it's all a terrible, horrible idea. Hillary Clinton spoke out against it. Howard Dean spoke out against it. The left is unanimous in its condemnation. And if they thought it could be a runaway convention and they could get control of that and destroy the Constitution, clearly they would be supporting the idea.
You know what, Mark? I need to hold you there because we're getting a sign from our producer. Amongst other things, we're bourgeois capitalists, so we do have to go to break, make some money. But can you stay with us for the next section? I want to continue, pick up where we left off. This is fascinating, and this is really important.
Glad to do it.
Folks, we're with Mark Meckler, president of Convention of States. Stay tuned. He's going to stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tired of seeing your rights stripped away by the politicians in Washington who don't care about you or me? Do you feel like a red dot in a pond of blue dots and feel disconnected? It's time to get connected. The American Center for Education and Knowledge is fighting back to restore America. Get connected. Go to acekfund.org. That's ACEKFUND.org to learn more. Do it now.
Hey everybody, Ericka Redic, the other half of The People. Come check me out over on Generally Irritable. That's where you'll find me on all the socials. I got Ericka Redic on Twitter. We're not just covering news and politics, but we also cover culture and how those things relate to one another. So come check it out. You can also go to generallyirritable.com and learn more about me and the show.
Hello, and welcome back to Of the People. I'm Robert Chernin with
Ericka Redic.
last time I checked. And staying with us, and thank you so much, is Mark Meckler, president of Convention of the States and longtime patriot, political player in D.C., although he's smart, he doesn't live in D.C. He lives in the real America, which is, we won't give you your location, but it's one of the states that's seen a lot of population growth lately. Can't imagine why. Mark, thank you for staying with us.
Hey, it's great to be with you guys. Thanks for the discussion.
Absolutely. I want to jump back into this whole the machinations of Convention of States, and we left about the runaway convention concept, and I think you addressed that really well.
Yeah.
I guess one of the concerns, because obviously the Democrats, capital D, and the progressives, while they are ardently against a Convention of States for the reasons you laid out, from my perspective, one of the concerns is if they can't beat it, and let's assume you get X amount of states,
Right.
You need 2/3 states, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. 34 states.
And how many do we have so far?
20.
Okay, so at some point, I'd love to see the list of the next 14 that you think are going to fall, because that's where we need to put our efforts. But let's assume we get to that point, and hopefully we do. Then the question is, how do you prevent the convention, maybe not be a runaway convention, but in today's social media, information technology, we can even bring in chatbot and all those other things that are now, reality is hard to determine sometimes. How do we not lose control of that process? Maybe we don't call it a runaway convention, but there's going to be people who are going to try to either take out certain protections that are there. I mean, how do we control the process in real terms?
Yeah, look, I would say, first of all, we rely on the framers of the Constitution. Remember, they went through this exact same thing in convention in 1787. There were people who tried to derail it. There were people who tried to derail it during ratification. You had the media was involved. You had the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Most people think of the Federalist Papers and they think of some erudite scholarly paper. These were newspaper articles written under pseudonyms. And so that debate was going on in the public. People were making scurrilous claims about each other. So all of that was taking place back then. So they built a structure for today that could absorb all that. And let me explain what I mean. People are worried about a runaway convention. So I'm going to sort of lay out a scenario, because Robert, you said I've heard this 1,000 times. I think it's probably closer to 10,000 at this point. The one that I hear most often, and I understand this, I'm a big advocate of the Second Amendment. It supports the rest of the Constitution. It helps keep a tyrannical government in line. I hear that we're going to lose the Second Amendment and that people are going to come to this convention. And let's say from California, where I used to live, I would not be surprised at all. In fact, I'd be shocked if they don't propose the repeal of the Second Amendment. Number one, it's not germane to convention, which means anybody from any conservative state, today there are 30 states with both houses controlled by Republicans, could raise their hand, raise a point of order like in any legislature, and this will operate just like a legislature, and say that's out of order. And then it'll be up to the chairman and the parliamentarian to make a ruling. Now, I think you're going to have a dominant number of states that have called the convention for these limited purposes. 34 states are required, likely be ruled out of order. Let's say I'm wrong. Who knows what the chairman does? Who knows what the parliamentarian does? And they debate it. Now you got to get 26 states to say that they want to propose a convention or an amendment to repeal the Second Amendment. Let's remember today, 24 states, now 26 states as of Florida, have constitutional carry. You don't even need a permit to carry your weapon. And 24 states allow you to carry your weapon in the legislature. I've done it in most of those legislatures. And you actually have 14 states where you can take a long gun, put one in the chamber, throw it across your back on a sling, and walk in and watch the proceedings. The idea that you could get 38 states to ratify that or 26 states to pass it out of convention is ridiculous. And when I say ridiculous, I want to be really clear what I mean. It's outrageous. It's stupid. It's fantasy. It's not real. And I'll make an offer to your viewers, which is if you believe that they could repeal the Second Amendment, or if you think there's an amendment that you as a conservative wouldn't like, then list the 38 states that will ratify that amendment. You can send that directly to me at mmeckler@cosaction.com. And if you list the 38 states and you make a legitimate argument, I'll pick up the phone and I'll give you a call and we'll have a conversation. I've made that offer now for 10 years straight to literally millions upon millions of people. Hannity, Levin, Shapiro, all the shows. I've never received an email because it takes only 13 states to stop anything that might make it out of convention that you or I wouldn't like.
Good point, Ericka.
That is a pretty darn good argument. I'm just sort of shocked that you can walk into any legislature with a gun loaded.
Hey, so Ericka, you're. I know that you know and love Texas. If you go to the legislature in Texas, you're not required to have a permit. But if you happen to have a concealed carry permit, which you need for reciprocity with some other states, they have a fast pass lane at the Texas legislature. You don't have to wait in line. You go up, they scan your permit, you walk right in with your handgun.
I actually did not know that. All right. This is just as an aside. I remember when there was a bunch of protests going on, a few years ago at various state legislatures, DC, and all the news reporters were clutching their pearls and upset. Oh, all these people carrying. Oh, they got guns. Yeah, exactly. The Second Amendment is not for hunting or protecting any kind of a culture. The Second Amendment is to make sure that our elected officials remember their place. So if they feel threatened, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but I think that's a good thing. I think they should have a healthy fear of the people you are governing, because if you believe that you know better and you're going to continue to overreach and take rights away, it says in the Constitution, it is our duty and responsibility to do something about it.
I actually think that's in the Declaration, by the way, of Independence. It is in the Declaration, but I want to address something you just said, Ericka, which I think is interesting, because you said that you want that the government should be afraid of the people. I think the government is afraid of the people. I think that's why we are where we are. I think when you look at Brexit, when you look at Bolsonaro in Brazil, when you look at the whole Trump phenomenon, and the reason Trump was such a threat, not just to the deep state, so to speak, but I won't say that Trump is the successor to the Tea Party movement. I wouldn't insult the Tea Party movement that way. And I'm a supporter of Trump. And Mark, I obviously know your background and how central you were to that movement in its founding. But I think, Ericka, that's exactly why we are where we are. That's why this whole divide and conquer thing, right? If you keep people worried about their job, if you keep them worried, if you divide them into small boxes and you have them fight each other, then the elites and the people who think they know better, whether it's the administrative state or not, their power is safe. But so, Mark, I want to ask you sort of a different kind of question. I understand all this, and I think it's hugely important what you're doing, and want to know sort of who you think the next 3 or 4 states are they're going to sign on. But if you're willing to go on record, but I guess my question is, a more conventional way, no pun intended, to do this might be to take each of those 3 things and try to get Congress to pass them, right? So rather than, because I understand now a little better than I did before about the process and sort of the fail-safes I think that are in place, why not go through the traditional amendment process in Congress and try to get the legislators to propose congressional amendments to the Constitution that way?
Look, I mean, I think in theory that's a beautiful thing, and I guess I would ask you a question in response, Robert, which is, what do you think the odds are of Congress passing a balanced budget amendment or a term limits amendment or anything that takes their own power away? And that's sort of rhetorical, but I'll answer it for you in terms of human nature, which the framers understood well, which is people don't voluntarily limit their own power. I mean, we have very few examples in history. George Washington was asked to be a king, and he said that was outrageous. But if you want to go through history, try to find examples of tyrants, people who've overstepped their reach, overstepped their legal bounds, saying, you know what, I think I might be outside of my bounds and I'd like to give power back to the people, or I want to give power to somebody else. That's just not human nature. In the 1980s, by the way, we were very close to calling a convention on term limits. We got to 32 states. And yet the states started to push back. We had a term limits amendment that was proposed in Congress. You can watch the video of this online as they cheer in Congress as that proposed amendment is defeated by a single vote. They're never going to pass it. It takes 2/3 of both houses. We can barely get 50% of either house. To get 2/3 of both houses to agree to limit their power, I'd say we'd be waiting for all of eternity.
Okay, fair enough. So in this process, I mean, do you think that you will be successful in getting a convention of states called? And if so, how long? I mean, no one's going to hold you. Well, it's going to be 3 days and 3 years and 2 months in one day. Yeah. But I mean, how far out is this process going? Who do you think the next states are that are going to sign aboard this? And realistically speaking, if you had to prognosticate, you would think that a convention of states would be called, if you're successful, by the year 2028. I'm making this up, of course. Yeah. What do you say to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I want to say it's really hard. This has taken a long time. It's a lot longer than I would like. I've been at it 10 years, but this is what the framers intended. In other words, they didn't want it to be easy to amend the Constitution. This is a big deal, right? You're going to go in and you're going to amend the founding charter of the United States of America, the base code of the United States of America. That's a big deal, and it should be really hard. It should take years. It should take a national consensus. It should take millions of people. So while I get frustrated on a human level sometimes, I think this is how the process was intended to work. Are we going to get there? Yep, we're going to get there. And the reason I say we're going to get there is it's kind of an either or. If we can't take power away from Washington, D.C., then Washington, D.C. is going to crash the country. And we just saw this in the debt ceiling debate. Even at its best, the plan that was proposed by the Republicans before they caved in and gave a bunch of it away wasn't going to do anything to fix any of these problems. And you can look back through all of American history, and by all, I mean go all the way back to the founding, Washington, all the way through to the current administration. Every administration, except for Calvin Coolidge's administration, has grown the government. And so that's the only way we're going to do it. So yeah, I think we're going to get it done. When we get it done, right now, I'm saying 2028, maybe 2030. I say those numbers because we have to make it through enough electoral cycles. We currently have 30 states with both houses controlled by Republicans. I'll be working to help flip Virginia. Their House of Delegates flipped in the last cycle. It's up this year for their Senate. So I'm hoping we can finish that off and flip Virginia. And then there are a few other states we're going to have to flip to get to 34, because I don't think any Democrat states are going to pass this.
I was going to ask you that. Is there a state whose legislature is controlled by the Democrats that has signed on board?
No, none. But to
What
be
does
fair,
what does that tell you?
yeah, but to be fair, we are seeing more
God
and more
help us.
Democrats in states either controlled by Republicans or Democrat states who are coming on board with Convention of States. It's really important that we couch this properly. It's not a partisan thing. It's partisan in the sense that I'm a conservative. Mike Ferris, my co-founder, is a conservative. A lot of the people who stood up for it, Mark Levin did a whole show on it this week. He's a conservative. But the reality is, all we're saying is take the power away from DC and give it back to the states. And that means that a very liberal state like California, a liberal state like Vermont or Connecticut, these are states would have more power under the Constitution post Convention of States that we're proposing. So it's not about giving conservatives more power or giving liberals more power. This is truly just about restoring federalism.
I just want to make sure I want to make sure everybody heard, though, in that last statement, Calvin Coolidge, Vermont president.
Silent Cal.
I'm just saying.
He was effective because he was silent. I just want to put that out there. I wish our current president was silent. Actually, I wish two presidents ago, who was on the verge of transforming America, little did we know, was silent too, but no such luck. No, look, I understand that. If this can be couched in nonpartisan terms, I think there's a greater chance of success here. But let's be real. People buy on emotion, and they justify on logic what they've already bought. So the whole fear factor, this will be pigeonholed as a Republican effort unless somewhere along the way you either get prominent Democratic politicians to come out or state legislatures that are controlled by Democrats to come out and support this. Just my opinion. I don't live this like you do or breathe this every day. I just think I think people are tired of partisan politics, and I think the more of a populist movement you can make this, the greater the chance of success.
I'm curious, Mark, with the rise in popularity that we're seeing of the likes of Robert Kennedy Jr., a very prominent Democrat, have you gotten any conversations with him or any of the other potential candidates for 2024?
No, I have not. I would love to talk with Kennedy. I think he's an interesting guy. I mean, I'm not like a lot of the conservatives that are getting sucked in by the guy. The guy's a leftist. He's a hard leftist. So he said some things that people on the right find appealing. And I think we got to be really careful of his overall politics and understand that. But I think I'd love to talk to him and see if we could get his support. I'm not against having support of folks that are on the left. But I'll be honest with you, I've talked to folks who are on the left that are totally in support of what we're doing. Some prominent folks on the left who shall remain nameless by their request. And what they say is, look, I would support it, but if I do, then I'm just going to get flamed by my side. They're going to attack me. They're going to, drive me out of the left. We have people way back when who supported it that told me that they just got trashed. Their email list shrank. They got trashed in social media. And so there's a strong tribalism on the left that prevents the left from stepping outside of the lane. And so I think it's, I hate to say this, but I think it's going to have to be a right-wing conservative Republican effort down the line.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Now, look, I wish you success. I'm so thankful for you to come on and educate certainly me, if not our listeners. I can use all the education I can get.
Ooh, okay. Really quick. Hold on, really quick, because we're getting the sign. We're getting the 3-minute warning from Benjamin. What do you think? What is your guess as to the next few states that you think are going to pass? You're going to make him go on record. I was giving him a pass, by the way, but okay, come on,
well, Mark. The next state is absolutely North Carolina. Okay. We've already passed the House. We've actually done that a couple of years. We've gotten stalled in the Senate in the past. Literally, as we speak, things are moving in the Senate. It's been tied up with their budget. They're still in session. They're one of the few not year-round states that's still in session. So I expect that we're going to pass before the end of the summer in North Carolina. That'll become state number 21. Then I would say really actually for me kind of hard to predict what happens in the next cycle as you get into the next year. I'll have to look at that as we get late into the fall. We'll start to kind of prioritize states and predict what it looks like it's going to move. But I say North Carolina is next.
Well,
I got
and
one quick
everybody
question before we go to
listening
break.
and
Hang
watching.
on, Rick.
Oh, sorry. Everybody listening and watching, go to conventionofstates.com. There you can see the states that have already passed. There's a great interactive map that shows what has passed, where the article, or should I say, the petition is at in each of the 50 states. And you can actually see in real time the progress and where your state is at, where you're listening and watching from. Where is your state at in the process?
Mark, last question real quick.
Yeah,
oh,
I
and you
appreciate
can
it.
sign the petition there. Go sign the petition, conventionofstates.com.
And another thing, Ericka, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Probably will come up with something to interrupt you in a minute, for sure. Definitely.
I don't even want to go there. Mark, quick one. First of all, thank you. But one quick question. So if a state legislature that passed the Constitutional Convention amendment or amendment, I don't know what the correct terminology
it's called a resolution.
Resolution, thank you. If it flips to a Democrat at some point, can they rescind it?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what you see is and this is a funny thing about saying there's going to be a runaway convention. Every state that's flipped to Democrat in the last few years has actually gone out and repealed all of their Article 5 applications. There are a bunch of them on record on a bunch of different subjects across the country over the last 400 years. The Dem states go in and they immediately repeal all their Article 5 applications. So, yeah, we have a rearguard action to fight. And this is one of the reasons it's so important. And our activists are engaged in elections all around the country, making sure they protect Republican majorities in state legislatures.
Amen.
All right, well, my inner Jersey response is those rat bastards, but you know, you get
By the way,
there.
we have a big team in New Jersey and New York, so they're all just like you. So I appreciate it.
They're awesome.
Well, we like a good fight, and we generally win. Right?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's all about fisticuffs. Folks, you have been listening to Mark Meckler, the president of Convention of States, and this has been, Mark, a fascinating, educational, and really great conversation. Where can everybody contact you again, or where can they find out more about Convention of States? Ericka, I was going to do that.
Yep. Go to conventionofstates.com, sign the petition, get involved. Most importantly, click the Take Action tab. It's great to listen. It's great to get educated like this, but being in the game is what counts. Conventionofstates.com, or folks want to follow me personally day to day. Now that Musk is in charge of Twitter, I'm back on Twitter, and they can follow me at Mark Meckler.
Excellent. Mark, thank you for joining us. Folks, this has been fun, but we got to go. Thanks for being with us. I'm Robert Chernin of The People.
And I'm Ericka Redic.
We'll see you next week. Take care.